All right, all you positive heads. On this week's SoulShare episode, I'm very excited to have Dr. John Demartini here with me on the show. John is a world leading human behavior specialist, researcher, author of 43 books, and founder of a revolutionary tool in modern psychology known as the Demartini Method. Hello, John. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've been you've been on my list of my wish list, if you will, of people to be able to chat with and pick your brain. And so here we are, super excited to do this. I would like to start with my cliche opening question, which is this: You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
I love teaching, researching, writing, and traveling, and that's what I do every single day of my life.
Amazing,
And that's it.
amazing.
Everything else is delegated. That's what I do. I'm a teacher in the area of human behavior and maximizing human awareness and potential.
Amazing. Well, if you would, I know you've been on this journey quite some time. Um, if you would share whatever feels relevant to share regarding your backstory.
I had learning challenges as a child. I was told in first grade I would never be able to read or write or
Wow.
communicate, probably never go very far, not to amount to much. I had to wear a dunce cap in 1960.
Wow, really?
Yeah, they had dunce caps then. Um,
Wow.
Ended up only making it through elementary school by asking the smartest kids questions because if they said something, I tend to get more out of it than trying to read. I couldn't read.
Wow.
I left school and started living on the streets when I was 13.
Wow.
18, I was in Hawaii surfing. That's where I lived. And I nearly died. And in the recovery of that, I met an amazing teacher named Paul C. Bragg one night at a recreation hall, a yoga class. And the one man in 1 hour and one with one message really got to me. And that night is the first time I believed that maybe I could overcome my learning problems and learn how to read and speak properly. And I had a dream that night to be a teacher and to be intelligent. I never thought I was going to be intelligent. I mean, surf intelligent. I could stand on a surfboard, but not academic. And I decided I was going to go back and try to go back to school and try to figure out how to read and write and do all those things. And I struggled initially, but I've persevered. And with the help of my mom, because I moved back home, with the help of my mom, she helped me memorize, or I memorized, and she tested me on 30 words a day out of reading a dictionary until my vocabulary was sufficient enough to pass school. And then I took off from there. I just never stopped reading once I learned I could read. And I've been blessed to read enormous amounts of books now. So
Wow.
I'm a vast reader. I write every day. I
Yeah.
teach every day, and I travel full time. I live on a ship and I travel around the world.
Wow. That's incredible. To go from what age were you when you started reading and writing?
I was 18 when I started reading.
Wow. To
Well, I mean, I tried to do things, but most of the reading was just not making sense.
Mhm.
The first grade teacher would put, a letter, and we'd do the letters, and it wasn't working for me. I had dyslexia, and I had to speak when I was in 1.5 years old to about 4. I was going to a speech pathologist because I couldn't use my mouth properly. And I remember
Mhm.
putting strings and buttons in my mouth and doing all these exercises to try to get my mouth to work right. Just wasn't doing it. So, but I was decent in surfing and
Wow.
sports. So I got directed there to try to find something I could excel at. And I was good. I went to Hawaii and I rode big waves and got in surf movies and surf magazines and stuff.
Wow. What a journey. I mean, to go from not reading and writing at 18 to 43 books. And I mean,
Well, I've written. Those are just the popular best. Those are paperbacks. When I look at all the manuscripts, it's over 300 books now.
wow.
So
Wow.
I read and write every single day. And, you know, the first grade teacher that told me what she said I never got to thank her because I really believe that
Right.
was exactly the catalyst
Mm-hmm.
later that I needed. If I hadn't
Mm-hmm.
had that, and if I'd been like everybody else, a lot of students, when I went back at 18 to try to go back to school, a lot of them took it for granted and just partied. And when you are told you'll never read and find out you can, it's really meaningful.
Yeah.
It's like, wow,
Right.
when I can discover I can actually get grasp a word and grasp a meaning and be able to pronounce it and speak it and say it and write it. So I wrote every day. I spoke every day. I memorized words every day. I mean, you do 30 words a day, you have 20,000 words at the end of 2 years.
Right. Right. Yeah. What a great example of something that appears to be a negative, right? A handicap. This person said this awful thing to you that, you know, stunted you. And it's like, there's a gift
Well,
there, right?
she was doing what a teacher would do, and I didn't feel. I mean, I believed her at the time because it wasn't working,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't. I would go back and hug her. I would say thank you because, and what's interesting is I have a daughter who's going in. She's 38, going on 39, and in first grade,
Mm-hmm.
I got asked to meet with the teacher.
Wow.
And the teacher said,
History repeats
I'm
itself.
afraid your daughter's going to. I mean, it was almost verbatim what I was told. And I just laughed. And the teacher
Yeah.
thought I was disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to hug the teacher. I said, you have no idea what this will be in the future.
Yeah.
And my
Right.
daughter is, articulate and a speaker and a reader and all the same
Right.
things.
Right.
It was so
Wow.
hilarious to have that happen again. And it's one of
What a
those
trip.
perfect things that happened in life.
What a trip. What a trip. Yeah. It's interesting how history will repeat itself. It's like, I instantly think in terms of like, oh, whoever that teacher is with your daughter is cut from the exact same cloth. It's the same energy presenting itself again
It
at
was
a different
funny.
time and place.
And normally my wife went to the school. They
Mm-hmm.
usually have the wives go because,
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
traditional thing is the men's at work and the woman's available to do that.
Right. Right. Right.
But I was there that day, and it was so synchronous to hear the same almost exact words. And I
Wow.
just chuckled, and the teacher thought I was so disrespectful. How can you be laughing at a serious matter like this?
Yeah.
And I said,
Right. Right. I
you have
love
no
that.
idea. I'm an
That's
international
incredible.
professional speaker and author and everything else, and you're just saying exactly what I need to hear. And
Yeah.
I told my
Right.
daughter, I said, this is a very important turning point in your life. You're destined to be a great, great orator and speaker. I can tell.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
I love it. I love it. Was the teacher once you explained your whole journey, was she sort of taken aback and
She she wasn't able to see a bigger picture, I think, at the time.
oh really? Oh
And
wow.
she was doing her job. She was
Mm-hmm.
doing what she felt. The statistics and the objective
Right.
findings she had was telling the truth. She was
Yeah,
telling what she
right.
saw.
Yeah.
But my daughter is incredibly articulate
Yeah.
and reads every day,
Yeah. Right.
writes and
Right.
speaks and
Amazing.
consults and
Amazing.
makes more money than the teacher will ever make.
Of course. Of course. Well, I'm curious about the method that you've developed that has, you know, become a revolutionary tool in modern psychology. If you could just share, um, you know, some insight into that.
Well, when I was 18 years old and I was learning to read, my mom, before my 19th birthday, said, son, what do you want for your birthday and for Christmas? Because I was born on Thanksgiving Day, so it's about a month before Christmas.
Oh, that's my nephew
And
too.
I said, Mom, I want the greatest teachings on the face of the earth, the greatest writings ever written by the greatest minds who ever lived.
Mm.
And she said, are you sure you don't want a t-shirt? I said, Mom,
How
I
about a
truly,
basketball? How about a
I want to
surfboard?
feed, I want to feed my mind with the greatest ideas and stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah.
And she goes, okay, let me see what I can do.
Mm.
So she had a brother who was a professor at MIT and also was a physicist and a chemist, a very bright guy.
Apparently.
And she contacted him and said, look, my son wants the greatest books, the greatest ideas, da, da, da. He said, let me see what I can do. A flatbed truck came to our house with 2 giant 6 by 6 by 6 foot wooden crates.
Wow.
And were put onto the ground in our yard. And I went out with a crowbar and opened up these crates and filled my room with thousands of books.
Wow.
And one of the books was A Discourse on Metaphysics by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. And when I opened up that book, the very beginning of the book, he talks about a perfection, a hidden order. Now, he had a theological and philosophical and mathematical background. But he had, in those days when he wrote, at the same time as Sir Isaac Newton did, around the same time, theology and science were not separated so much. They were kind of joined, natural philosophy. So he said that there was a divine perfection, a divine beauty, a divine love, a divine order in life that few people ever get to know. But those that do, their lives are changed forever. And when I read that, I didn't know why, but I got tears in my eyes.
Yeah.
And most people know when they get tears in their eyes, there's something meaningful and something, a sign or an authenticity moment in their life. It kind of guides them.
Sure.
And I felt that at that moment. And so I took that and I said, I want to know what this means. I want to know what this order is.
Gave you a name, right?
Yeah, I said, I want to find out what that is. I want to explore that. Well, I also got another book for him called The Principles of Quantum Mechanics by Paul Dirac. Now, he was the Nobel Prize winner, and he's the one that introduced the idea of particles and nanoparticles. For every particle, there's a nanoparticle. So when I saw that, which was a very tedious reading book, I mean, I had to have dictionaries about every 3 or 4 words. I thought, if you can take positive and negative charged particles and weave them together, merge them together, and make light, I wonder if you took positive and negative emotions and merged them together, could you make enlightenment? It was a real naive idea, but it was just something, it was like there was no data that could show that that was real. It was just a thought in my mind.
Sure.
And I thought, if I could do that and I could find an enlightened state, and that would be the order. And then I read Ludwig Boltzmann in Thermodynamics, another book he sent, because these are heavy books from this guy. He's a physicist, chemist.
You went straight to the deep end of the pool.
I went to the straight end, and I was literally going through dictionaries and mathematical symbolisms to try to comprehend these books. But I would spend a day on one page sometimes, or 4 pages.
Yeah.
But I wanted to know this. And he said that there's order and disorder, and there's a tendency to go from order to disorder, and it's entropy. And there's a reverse of that, as Erwin Schrödinger, Nobel Prize winner, said, if you take disorder and move it the other way, you make order. Yep. And life was disorder to order, and death was order to disorder. Death physics, life physics. But he said that these are only probabilistic things. This is not what's actually there. Today, Stephen Wolfram, mathematician, shows that the reason why we call things disorder is because our computational capacity is limited, and that someday we'll have algorithms that will be able to figure out what we think is disorder, and maybe there's a hidden order in it.
Right.
So since that time, I have been studying it. I mean, Einstein said the same thing in his book on Brownian movement. And so I wanted to know, is there a hidden order in human behavior, in the things that seem to be random and chaotic in human behavior?
Right.
And I started going down that alley. And that led me to study 300 different disciplines, all relating to that.
Wow.
I mean, anything that might allow me to assist in the depth of understanding in that pursuit. And I started developing a series of questions to make people awakened and conscious of things they were unconscious of. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you're a guy, single, and you see this beautiful girl, and you're attracted to her. In fact, you're infatuated with her, the fragrance, the beauty, etc. And you're gullible. You know how guys are.
Instantly, your logic is gone.
Yeah, your logic is gone, and your function from who knows where.
Yeah.
but you're now conscious of the upsides and unconscious of the downsides, and you have kind of like a fatal attraction, like Michael Douglas and Glenn Close, right?
Right, right, right.
And you're unconscious of those downsides. Now your intuition is whispering, don't be gullible, be on the lookout, don't be fooled. But you're ignoring the intuition because you have an impulse that's so strong from your amygdala that your dopamine levels are overriding your GABA and glutamate from your higher cortical centers. So you're a little animal impulsively seeking, wanting to eat the prey,
Right.
or you resent somebody, which represents predator, and you have an instinct to avoid them because you're conscious of the downsides and now unconscious of the upsides. So either of those poles of seek or avoid, impulse or instinct, prey or predator, you're only conscious of portions of what's there and you're unconscious of portions.
Interesting. Yeah.
But if I can assist people with a series of questions to become conscious of both sides simultaneously,
Right.
you don't have an impulse towards or an instinct from, so you're not extrinsically run by these circumstances. You're now poised, centered, and now you're acting it, not reacting it, and you're balanced. And you feel appreciation and love for this individual because you're not seeking or avoiding.
And you're not putting them
We'll
in
help.
some unfair, weird pedestal thing that's a
They're not on a
fantasy.
pedestal or in the pit. They're in
Yeah.
your
Right.
heart.
Yeah. Right.
And when you're mindful and see both sides simultaneously and are fully conscious of the conscious and unconscious, you become present with people, not seeking or avoiding it. You're not
Yeah.
dependent or independent.
Yeah.
And you're not juvenilely dependent on them, seeking like a little underdog, or precociously independent, avoiding like an overdog. You're
Yeah.
just present. And in that state, we're more executively functioned, we're more strategic, we're more objective, and we have the highest probability of setting goals that are objectives, not fantasies,
Right.
and not living in philias and phobias, but living in the presence of a clear objective that's meaningful that you pursue spontaneously with acting. So the method is designed to ask questions, to discover the hidden order in the apparent chaos that we're overlooking in our daily awareness, which weighs us down. Because anything we infatuate with or resent occupies space and time in our mind and runs our life.
Yeah.
But the second we balance the equation, we run our life. We live
Right.
by design, not emotional reactions extrinsically by the external world that we think we're victims of history of. Now we become masters of destiny, live by design, more objective, and achieve things. So the
Right.
method is designed to assist people in asking questions that make them aware of things they're overlooking and they're reacting because of that missing information. Wolfram says that disorder is nothing but missing information. Claude Shannon says that disorder is nothing but missing information. And there's two Nobel Prize winners that got a great piece on information theory describing this. So I've been on the pursuit for 51 years, 51 years now,
Wow.
of how do you find the hidden order in the apparent case, the chaos of human behavior. And I've done, I think, some really amazing discoveries in that area and put that into methodology to help people no longer be victims of their history so they can be masters of their destiny.
Wow. Can you give us some examples of the type of questions that one would pose to bring
Yes.
them out of these polls?
Yeah, so let's say you meet this individual that you um, have misinterpreted as somebody that's down in the pit that you resent,
Okay.
and you are unaware of the upsides, and you label them, you create a false causality that they're the cause of your misery,
Right.
and a false attribution bias that they're the real reason why you don't feel great or something, and you
Yep.
resent them. I ask the individual who's resenting, I do this every week in my breakthrough experience book, what specific trait, physical trait, action or inaction do you perceive that individual displaying or demonstrating that you despise, dislike, or hate most? And we narrow it down to a specific action, not a broad, vague generality and label, people will say abusive. And I said, no, that's a label. What's the actual action that they did? We narrow it down so we get precise. Because episodic memories in the brain are very precise things in space and time that are objective, not nebulous interpretations that we make,
Right.
not abstractions that we make and generalizations, but really specific. Once we identify what specific trait, action, inaction do you perceive this individual displaying or demonstrating that you dislike the most, and we define that clearly. We want to make sure there's no hearsay, there's no broad, vague generality labels. There's no how you felt, because that's how you felt, not what they did. Then we go to the next question. We ask, go to a moment where and when you perceive yourself displaying or demonstrating the same specific trait, action, inaction that you despised in them. And now let's make sure we're not judging them for things that we're doing, but we're overlooking. We're too proud to admit we do it. And we hold them accountable to look, because I've taken hundreds of thousands of people through this process, and we haven't found a trait people judge that they didn't have in their life.
Yeah, it's like clockwork, right?
It was in, it's an old proverb. I mean, I believe in Romans 2:1 in biblical writings, it says, beware of judging, because what you judge is you. You do the same thing.
Yeah.
And I found that to be absolutely true. It's purely reflective. But
it's like
people
this
are
idea
deflective.
It's this idea of I'm not what you say I am, you're what you say I am. We are really both, right?
But you're both. So I learned that. I went to the Oxford Dictionary when I was about 30 years old or so, and I went through 4,628 individual traits. I literally went through the entire dictionary, underlined every possible human behavioral trait, and then I thought, who is it that has the most extreme example of that behavior that I know of? And I wrote their name there, and then I looked at where and when did I display the trait until I could see that I'm equal to that.
Wow.
And I found that by owning all those traits and realizing nothing's missing in me, I realized there's nothing to get rid of. There's nothing I need to seek. I have it all. And instead of me reacting to people on the outside, I just see a part of myself.
You relate.
And if I love that side, I don't have a reaction to them. They don't run my life.
Yeah, right.
So that's a preemptive strike by being aware and fully conscious of your own self before you react to other people. Because many people are too proud or too humble to admit what they see in others inside themselves and have deflective awareness and disempower themselves, and then become victims of their outside world.
Yeah.
So I hold them there. Then the third question, and I make them identify where it was, when it was, who they did it to, and who perceived them doing it, until the quantity and quality is equal. Once that's equal, they're humbled, because they realize, my God, I've been judging this person, but the reality is that they're reminding me of a thing I'm feeling ashamed of and too proud to admit it, and dissociated from my shame, putting on a pride facade to try to avoid having to face what they're bringing to me, and they're bringing it out of me. And they're my teacher, making me aware of what I'm not loving in myself.
Right.
Then I ask the next question, because many things we have in our life that we experience that we think are terrible, traumatic, a day, a week, a month, a year, or 5 years later, we can come to the realization that it was a catalyst in a new trajectory, and we're now grateful for it. So why have the wisdom of the ages with the aging process? Why not have the wisdom of the ages without it, by asking, what are the upsides now? We're just not seeing it. Trauma is not what happens to us. Trauma is what we make things. We make out of things that are neutral because we only saw the downsides to it.
Right.
So I basically go in there and I said, now go to a moment where and when you perceive this individual displaying or demonstrating that specific trait, action, and action you despise most. Go to that moment and go actually into the moment of perception. And in that moment of perception, how did it benefit you? How did it serve you? How is it an advantage to you to experience that event, that trait? And at first they go, well, it didn't. I said, no. You answered that within 1.5 seconds, which means you really didn't look very hard, and you're willing to play the victim, and you're getting sympathy from that. And so you're feeding off the sympathy from people instead of actually being accountable for your own reality. So I said, so what's the benefit of that? And they started uncovering the benefits. Well, it catalyzed my independence, and I became an entrepreneur, and I didn't depend on my dad. And I ended up deciding I was going to move, and I now am a global person, and now I own my own company, and I found the wife of my dreams, and da da da. And they start to see these correlations, and they go, I never thanked my dad.
Yeah.
And they come to a realization that there were just as many benefits and drawbacks, and that was not a trauma after all. It was a trauma labeled by them because they never saw the upsides. Then I go back to the moments when they did it and find out how did it benefit the people they did it to. Because as long as they're ashamed, they're assuming that what they did had a negative without a positive to them. And they go and discover the benefits to them and liberate themselves from the shame, and now no longer have emotional reactions to people that remind them of that part. Then I go and I do the next question. Go to a moment where and when you perceive the same individual displaying exactly the opposite behavior. Because there's no one-sided person.
Right.
I'm not a nice person. I'm not a mean person.
Right.
I'm an individual with a set of values. If you support my values, I'm nice as a pussycat. You challenge my values, I can be mean as a tiger. If I go to an airline and I check in and they say, well, Dr. DeMartini, we've upgraded you. You have a first-class lounge. You've got this and this and this. I go, oh, thank you so much. I'm
right.
If they say somehow, even though you have 2,000 million miles on our airline, somehow we've overlooked your thing and we don't have a flight for you. And I don't go,
yeah, right. Thank you.
I say I want a Richard Branson at the front desk now.
Yeah, right. Totally.
Yeah. So I can be tough as a tiger.
Yep.
So I'm not a label, nice, mean, narcissist, I'm just a human being with both sides. And people are trying to get rid of half of themselves and trying to be only one-sided and block the love for their total. You know, the Buddha says
and everything is everything nowadays too. It seems like it's if you tap into that side of yourself that has anger or agitation or whatever, which is something I've had to work really hard on. I really relate to everything that you've said. Nowadays, they love to label it and box it. Oh my gosh, that's violent. They call it violent. You know, violent communication. Everything's violent. You know, it's like
the things we used to do with our kids, we can't get away with anymore.
Oh
we got it, but we don't get to give it. It's like
you got to be a Zen master. You're a Zen master, or you need to be canceled. You know, it's like
Well, I always say that, as the Buddha says, the desire for that which is unobtainable and the desire to avoid that which is unavoidable is the source of human suffering. So anytime you're living in a moral hypocrisy, trying to get rid of half of yourself and only be one-sided, you have futility. Yeah. So I don't waste my time on that. That's so childish as far as I'm concerned. So what I do is I go in there and help them find out where this individual has the opposite sign. The complete opposite behavior. So if they verbally criticize you, where did they verbally praise you? When you did things that supported their values, they verbally praise you. When you did things that challenged their values, they verbally criticize you. They're a human being. If you master the art of communicating what you want in terms of their values, you can get what you want from them. But if you don't, you're going to keep getting resistance. It's not that they're that way. It's just that they're both-sided. You're not learning how to communicate because you're self-righteously projecting your expectations and values on them instead of learning to respectfully see that their values are equally as valuable as yours.
Yeah.
So there's a lesson there. So anyway, those are 5 of 68 questions that I haven't seen anybody who complete those questions without having tears of gratitude, no matter what they've been through. There's nothing their mortal body and senses and the phenomenal world that they can experience that their authentic self, which theologians call the soul, the state of unconditional love, can't love. Yeah. So there's nothing that you have to be a victim of history about. Yeah. And people go, well, what about this? And what about this? I said, I've worked with thousands of people that have all kinds of amazing things that they want to come in there with a label of a trauma on, and they walk out with a tear of gratitude. Yeah. So I'm a firm believer that our brain is a homeostatic mechanism with interoception from the viscera and from the soma, doing whatever it can with feedback systems to guide us to live authentically and live in an empowered homeostatic mechanism to maximize our awareness and potential in life. And that's what I'm committed to, helping people see the hidden order in their chaos and be grateful for life and move with fuel instead of baggage and with vitality instead of gravitational weight.
I love this because you've really given, we hear this idea, that gratitude is the doorway to everything that we want. And you've really given a framework as to how to to navigate, because it's, be grateful for everything. Okay, how? When I'm
Yeah, but
operating
there's a
and thinking.
science.
Yeah,
If you
right.
just tell somebody that, they're not going to know
Right.
what to do.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's just lip words, and people say, "Yeah, I'm grateful." It's like saying,
Hmm.
I forgive you," or something like that. I would
Yeah,
say
right,
that's a
right.
self-righteous projection of somebody that
Right.
they did something to you that you didn't do to you too.
Yeah.
No, no. True gratitude, which is an executive function, actually,
Hmm.
is when you see the hidden order.
Yeah, right.
I've taken thousands of people and balanced out their
Mm.
equation. There's two types of gratitude. There's a superficial gratitude when things are supporting you. When somebody does
Hmm.
something nice to you, they're generous, or they go and
Yep.
support you, you go, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then there's a true gratitude when you actually able to see both the support and the challenge, the positive and negative simultaneously. Wilhelm Wundt, at the turn of the century, 1895, about 130 years ago, um, said that there were two types of contrast: simultaneous contrast and sequential. He said, if you are able to see both sides simultaneously, you have love and appreciation.
Mm.
If you are able to see one side and then later the other side over time, you have emotions. So if you're infatuated and then later you resent them, that's a sequential contrast. It's a cyclothymia, mood swinging kind of behavior. But if you're able to see both sides simultaneously, your heart opens.
Yeah.
When something supports you, it's sort of like a parasympathetic stimulus, prey. It's anabolic and it activates the delta waves in the brain. And when something challenges you, it's catabolic and it activates the beta waves, the 3 and 13 cycle per second waves. But if you find a balance and put them simultaneously together, you get an alpha theta wave about 8 cycles per second. The moment they're perfectly balanced, a gamma synchronicity across the cortex occurs, an aha eureka moment, and it stimulates the hypothalamus that goes to the inner cardiac network and literally feels the heart open.
Wow.
And it's a confirmation of seeing things in actuality instead of the reality of our senses that's skewed, subjectively biased. So you get to see an objective reality for a moment, and it's very empowering, and it's a confirmation of authenticity. Because when you put people in pedestals, you'll minimize yourself. That's not authentic you. When you put people in pits, you'll exaggerate yourself. That's not the authentic you. But when you put people in your heart, and you have equanimity within you and equity between you and them, you now have an authenticity state and a gamma synchronicity and a heart, and tears come out of your eyes. Can't stop it, tears.
Wow.
When I work with the Demartini Method, I hold people accountable, which means to be able to see their assets and liabilities on their balance sheet until they get
Hmm.
a tear of gratitude. And then I know the therapy's go over. Now their resentment, you don't worry about it ever coming back. It's gone because the
Yeah.
story has been rewritten.
Yeah.
And people don't believe they can redo their story, but the truth is, I can take your past story and completely rewrite that story. And
Wow.
and most of it is BS anyway. It's stuff we've distorted, and our memories are malleable, and we make imaginations on top of memory and distort things to make the story better, to give us an advantage playing the victim sometimes.
Right.
And
Right.
all of that is transcendable. And I love helping people do that. That's what inspires me every day.
I mean, it's such a powerful thing to do. It's we're all, sort of vulnerable to going into these stories and victim scenarios, and a lot of people just never even find their way, you know, it, out of it at all. Never even get to the point where they can self-analyze or have a framework to do that.
Can I share a story that might be useful?
Please.
I had a lady who attended my breakthrough experience, which is this program I've done like 1,192 times.
Is that all?
Yeah, I keep record of it. And she attends there, and she comes in, and she said she's running her story. So she's been going to a therapist for 38 years, running a story about her mom abandoning her.
Yeah.
And so I just go, okay. So I asked her a question that nobody ever asked her. Really simple question. So, what specific trait, action or inaction, do you perceive that you missed out on because your mother wasn't there? And so she wrote down, well, somebody to nurture me, somebody to tell me what to do and not to do this way, somebody to teach me cooking. I mean, she made a list of things that she assumed that if she'd had, life would have been happier. So she lived in a fantasy about how it could have been, should have been, would have been if that would have all happened, fabricated in her mind. Because there's other women that felt like my mother smothered me and always told me how to do things, and they're now victims of the other side of that equation. So I basically said, okay, great. So let's take that first one. So who gave you attention and physical affection? She says, nobody. I said, no, I didn't ask that. I didn't ask, was there anybody? I said, who? And then I made her accountable, and she said, well, my aunt and my grandmother. And then she goes, oh yeah, my best friend's mom kind of like took me in like a child and wished that she could have me as a child.
Hmm.
And I said, okay, is the quantity of all the attention and affection that you're wanting from your mother, is the quantity of these three women equaling your mom's? She says, yes. So you didn't miss it. You got it dispersed. Not one person, but three people. She goes, yes. I never noticed that. Because I always say there's nothing missing. It's in a form that we're not acknowledging because we're addicted to a fantasy about how it's supposed to be. So I said, okay, now let's go to the next trait. And we went itemized one by one down the list of all the things she thought she missed. And I showed her that none of them were missing. They were all in her life in another form.
Wow.
Including a little blankie that was a security blanket that she held on to, that she talked to like her mother. And a doll, when she was really young, a little doll, she turned into a mother and it would tell her what to do and tell her how to do things. And she remembered that all of a sudden.
Wow.
So that was a surrogate mechanism that she dissociated from the so-called trauma of her illusion into this other world to make it to survive, right?
Yeah.
So once we brought it, we accountably showed the quantity was equal. I said, can you now see that everything you thought was missing in your mom was in your life? It wasn't missing. Now let's ask this question, because you're still assuming that this fantasy would be better, and you're assuming the way you got it was worse. Let's shatter that delusion. Let's go to that moment. And if your mom had given you that attention, what would have been the drawback? She says, well, there wouldn't be no drawback. I'd be happy. No, that's the delusion you built in your mind.
Right.
Because if your mom is there, there's benefits and drawbacks. Any human being you're having a relationship with has things you like and dislike. There's benefits and drawbacks. Anybody in a marriage knows that I like my husband, I don't like my husband. I like my husband, I don't like my husband.
Right.
So I asked her that, and all of a sudden she just got quiet and stared and started to cry. And I said, what is it? She said, when you asked me what would have been the drawback if my mom had been there to give me attention and affection, all of a sudden, when I was 4 years old, my aunt told me something that I blocked out of my mind until just now.
Wow.
And she started crying and she says, I can't believe I did that. I must have done that because I was angry at my mom. I must have just cut out what I was told. He said, what were you told? She said, my aunt said, the reason why your mother left you is not because she didn't love you. She left you in a bath, didn't regulate the temperature. You almost burned to death and drowned. Your mother had bipolar condition and she forget what she would do. And she asked me to raise you because she felt that you were worth more than what she could offer.
Wow.
When she got that, she just bawled.
Wow.
And she realized that the story she's run for 8 years was fabricated because of a fantasy built in her mind. And the truth is her mother loved her. That's why she gave her up, not because she abandoned her. And her framing shifted. And then we went through and found out what would be the drawback if her mother had done all these things and what was the benefit to all the people. And when she's done, she just opened her heart and she says, I just want to tell my mom, thank you, I love you. The story was gone from 38 years. And she just felt it. And I said, is there anybody here in the room that reminds you of your mom? Because there's a group of people in the room. And she pulled out a woman and she sat, we made a surrogate out of her and let her say all the things she wanted to say to her mom and she hasn't gotten to say in 39 years almost.
Wow. Wow.
And it was over. The story, I said, now, do you believe that you're an abandoned girl? No, it's gone. I said, you were a victim of your history. Now you're master of your destiny. because you now can
Mm,
see that whatever happened was on the way, not in the way. And you were comparing it to a fantasy and not honoring what it is. And depression is a comparison of your current reality to a fantasy. So
right.
you're now grateful for your mom. You're not depressed. Is there any depression about your mom wasn't there? She goes, no. In fact, I'm exuberant. And then she said, I want to find my mom and I'm going to make sure I do something extraordinary in my life and thank her and make sure she knows that I used what happened to my advantage. And her
Ooh,
shift changed. She wrote a book. She ended up changing her trajectory. I mean, the people she hung out with went up in standard because she didn't feel she was worthy. So she's
right.
hanging with people that would beat her, and
Yep.
and she positioned herself differently because her perception of her reality changed.
Right.
And I love watching transformations like that because I really don't. It doesn't matter what you've been through, or what you're going through, or what you're experiencing. What matters is how you perceive it, decide, and act upon it.
Yeah.
And you can change your perception, you can change your decision, you can change your action, you can change your life. Mine changed in 1 hour meeting that gentleman when I was 17 years old. My life changed. So that's why when people say, no, you can't change, no, people are stuck, they may be, but it's because they don't get introduced to tools that can actually do it.
Yeah.
And that's what my mission was. My mission since 18 is to develop the tools to assist people in actually making the transformation if they want it. Some people are perfectly, fulfilled in what their life is, nothing to change. People
Yeah.
say, well, are you coming to your seminars, are they going to help me? I said, I don't know. If you don't have a problem, you may not need it.
Mm, right.
But if you think you have a problem, I can maybe help you see that there is no problem. A
Yeah.
problem is simply not knowing how to ask the right question to get the right information you think is missing.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you using this surrogate approach? I've never seen this done, but I've heard about it. Um, and this is the same as like constellation. Have you heard of?
No, yes, I'm familiar with that. The constellation, I think now we know that in epigenetics, when a sperm and an egg unite and make a zygote, a single cell that then divides by mitosis and differentiates into all the cells of our body and undergoes morphogenesis, as they call it. Um, there's a thing called epigenetics. There's signal molecules that are released on the cells that activate different gene expressions in the next cell. And they now know that there's epigenetic, multi-generational epigenetics, that things that occurred in the previous generation can tag and methylate and acetylate with epigenetics the next generations. So the parents' emotional experiences can be carried on to generation. And they've traced it at least 14 generations now.
Wow.
So the constellation work leaves these remnants of epigenetic codings that literally are impulses and instincts in the next generations to come that can make us react to things that are actually a result of things that were previous.
Yeah.
And we pretty well have a model for that. It's not esoteric, in other words, there's a biological mechanism of how the constellation systems work. So the constellation can be really useful to help bring up those charges that you may be unconscious of.
Right.
The method I've developed can now, once you address them and find them, now we can address them and neutralize them. And it doesn't really matter, even if it came back from previous generations. Many of the epigenetic tags upon birth and the first months of life are removed by our own experiences. But we can scientifically remove those epigenetic tags and all that trauma or whatever in the past, even in this time, our own life. So we don't have to be victims of that. We can't say, well, my 3 generations, my father did that, and that's the reason I'm having this problem. I think
Right.
that's a cop out. We have the capacity to change our epigenetic codes by associations now. But if we don't, then those things will keep carrying down generation after generation, and it keeps repeating itself.
Right. Wow. Have you come across anyone going through your process who it doesn't benefit, or is there any reason that it would not work?
I haven't seen anybody that couldn't benefit. I've seen people that refuse to do the work,
Right.
and they have an agenda, an unconscious motive to keep the attention together. Let me give you an example. I'll give a real example. I had a woman who had a 16-year-old son hang himself in his bathroom at
Wow.
their house.
Yeah.
with his girlfriend. They were doing a sexual act and they were hanging to lose oxygen because they thought that was going to give him some more organisms or something.
Wow.
And he hung himself, and the girl freaked out, and the parents come home, and they're like, I have a dead son hanging in a thing. And the girl's like freaking out. And, so she's
Wow.
in shock and she's grieving. And so she asked me to assist her on the grief process because I developed a grief methodology that's really powerful. So as I was working with her, I was noticing that she was dodging the question and resisting the questions. And I was going, there's a motive here, you not to get the answers. What's going down? And I probed and found out what it was. She came from a very low socioeconomic position. And she finally admitted that she saw a very wealthy man and she was kind of trying to upgrade. A little bit of a gold digger.
Mm-hmm.
And so she found this guy and made up a bit of a story about who her life was to get into the deal, and then got pregnant. This son is the pregnancy from that experience. Well, when the parents of the wealthy son found out that she got pregnant, they offered to do an abortion and they didn't want the son trapped. But the son said, no, if I've got a baby, I'm going to marry the girl and I'm going to take the baby. That's the was. So she married the guy, scored the deal, and the parents never wanted them to be married and didn't like her.
Yeah.
So there's an alienation of this, this mother and daughter-in-law.
Sure.
So when the son died, then what happens is there's no more motive. So as long as she's grieving, she's got stability because they're not going to attack her while they have a grieving child, the death.
Right.
So, but what then she admitted to me is the son was doing drugs, was selling drugs, was getting in trouble, and was afraid the police were going to come to the house. He didn't know where he was hiding drugs. He was doing sex and stuff and was involved in all kind of crazy stuff. And she was at a point where I just can't handle this anymore. And this is the consequence of the gold digging kind of thing. This is the pain that you get with it because you never get a pleasure without a pain kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So she was actually wishing he would just disappear, grow up and disappear, because she didn't want to have to manage the stress levels of this teenager. Because teenagers can make parents,
Miserable.
push them to the limit sometimes.
Yeah. Right.
My parents dropped me off of the freeway and said, go hitchhike to California and to Hawaii,
Wow.
go surfing.
Wow.
Yeah. But in the process of doing that, she didn't want to admit that she was actually partly grateful that it's over with.
Right.
The stress is over. But if she had admitted that, then the parents would come in and say, well, we're going to pay you $10 million to get out of here.
Right.
They're worth a lot. They're one of the wealthiest families. So it's just, look, just take 10 million to get out of here and leave the husband. So she was afraid that might happen. So that's why she was prolonging the grief, because she had an unconscious motive. It wasn't even really unconscious, partly conscious and unconscious. Mm-hmm. So I had to navigate through all that and break her through and because as long as she's infatuated with that family and dependent on that family and the man and doesn't feel she could live the life she wants independently, she's trapped.
Right.
So I had to go in there and take the family off the pedestal, have her own where she has those behaviors and feel competent enough, and then figure out a way of negotiating in case they try to do that, negotiating enough where has a life she wants. And the truth was they would easily pay her off to get out of there. So once she was clear about it, she could admit what was going on and get through the grief. Wow. So sometimes people have a motive. We had a gentleman in Sydney, Australia that was refusing to do a grief process exercise because we found out that he actually murdered his son. He's the one that killed him.
Wow.
So there was a motive not to get it. We had another one in south of Africa where a daughter and a father who were incestual killed the mother to get an insurance policy to leave the country.
Wow.
I mean, there's some interesting things that people do out there. And that's not my typical client that comes to the program. That's like 1 out of 1,000.
Right.
But you get these and you find out that some people have conscious or unconscious motives not to do things. Just like an addiction, many times there's conscious, unconscious motives. They're still getting benefit out of what they're doing. That's why they're doing it. Even though they say, I need to stop. They're getting unconscious benefits.
Right.
So I have to sometimes navigate through and find out what they are. And I've got systems for that. and I catch them in their stuff. And then
Right.
we navigate around it and go through it.
Right. Wow. What a journey. Well, I can't believe we're almost to an hour already. Wow, time
We
flies.
just started.
I know, and I know you have a hard stop time. So I'd like to change lanes for a minute as we sort of wind down here. I always love to hear, and you have shared some stories already, but I always ask for a story of synchronicity or serendipity or a positive paranormal story. And I'm curious if you have anything like that up your sleeve to share.
Well, I could think of different ones at different clients and things. In my own life, I think I was flying, getting ready to fly. I was doing a program in Madrid,
Mm-hmm.
the Breakthrough Experience, and they were giving me a ride to the airport. The people that hosted me,
Mm-hmm.
and I get to the airport, do the check-in, and was going through a little customs line, and there was about an 83 or 4-year-old woman in front of me,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm behind her, and I'm playful. I like to tease people,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm just sitting there talking to the woman a little bit, and all of a sudden her husband comes back, and he went to get something for her, and so he comes up and he said, and I said, sir, don't mess with my woman. I put my arm around his wife. I said, don't mess with my woman. I don't know what you're doing. You can't just pick up my woman like that. And I was
What?
just teasing.
Right.
So he goes, I can't believe it. I go get you something and you're off with a younger man, right? So
Yeah. Right.
he's teasing it. So we're
Yeah.
having some fun. We go through the customs. We go to the club lounge. And that day it was Continental Airlines because that later they merged into United.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're in a Continental Airlines, and I go get some waters, and we come and we all sit together. And I said, so what do you do, or what did you do? Because I knew they were up in their 80s, because I could tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said, well, I'm a retired OBGYN. And I said, fantastic. What do you do? She says, well, I was a housewife, and
Mm-hmm.
I haven't worked for years. My husband took care of us. I said, fantastic. She said, what do you do? And I said, well, I travel around the world and harass people in airports, as you can see,
Yeah. Yeah.
and have fun. I'm in human behavior and write books and stuff. And I said to him, by the way, where did you practice? And he said, in Herman Hospital. I said, by God, I was born there.
Wow.
He said, what year were you born? I said, 1954. And he said, morning or afternoon?
Oh, wow.
And I said, morning, 8:08 in the morning. He said, young man, if you were born in Herman Hospital at 8:08 in the morning, then I would have delivered you.
Wow.
And I looked on my birth certificate, and by God, it was him.
Wow.
So I told him, I said, I finally got you back. You
Mm.
wedged between me and my mom when I was born.
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah.
I got wedged between you and your wife before you died.
That's hilarious. Well, that's a good one. That is amazing. Where is that located, and where were you at? What airport? Just curious.
I was in Madrid airport before I got on the plane to Houston.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's not like next door.
No, that
Amazing.
was in a completely different country. So
What
the
a trip.
probability of meeting the guy that actually, you know, takes you out of the womb, that's not
Mm-hmm.
often you do that. So I would call that a kind of a synchronicity, a fun synchronicity.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. When I was in college, I made friends with a guy, and then years later, it's not quite as bizarre as this one is your story, but we became friends, and then him, my brother, like a bunch of us, ended up moving into a place off campus a few years later. And then as we got to know him more and more, he brought up his grandfather at one point. I'm like, I feel like I've heard that name, and it turns out it was his grandfather that had married my parents, you know, 30 years, 25 years earlier. And unbeknownst to us, for years of our friendship, like, oh, your grandfather married my parents, like, and we were roommates. So this kind of reminds me of that story. But yeah, it's a trip how the threads of connectivity find their way again, huh?
Yeah, I was. I have to share this as an interesting story, but I'm 18 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to go back to school at a junior college at Wharton in Houston, outside Texas,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm carpooling with this guy who's an engineering student, and his dream was to create magnetic trains, and he was drawing them and designing them and putting them together. And my dream was to travel the world and to go to every country on the face of the earth to teach. I've
Mm.
spoken now in 194 countries.
Wow.
So that was my dream at 18. There was a guy that carpooled with us one time who came from a rich family and was a little bit kind of arrogant and kind of stuffed up and was kind of like talking down to us. And we were talking about our dreams, and he goes, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. You'll work in the cotton gin. Come on, man.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Nobody." We lived in a town that had 9,000 people. It's a small country town, you know. He said, "Yeah, nobody leaves this place. Nobody does all that. You know, you're going to work in the cotton gin, and you know,
Right.
that's it." And he was really condescending,
Yeah.
criticizing,
Yeah.
and there's a part of me that was defensive against that because maybe I was insecure,
Yeah.
and the
Sure.
guy was like going, "What a jerk," right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're raining on our parade. So we didn't let him go with us anymore. We didn't carpool with him. Thought he was a bit he deserved to take his own private service.
Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
So anyway, that was 1973. A year and a half ago, I was doing a live webinar around the world, and there were quite a few thousands of people on it. And a guy sends in a little comment in the chat, and I have a lady in South Africa that watches that and responds if there's needed to.
Sure.
And the chat said, "Is that the John DeMartini that used to live in Richmond, Texas?" And my assistant said, "There's a gentleman named this that
Mm.
is asking if you're the John DeMartini." Says, "Oh my God,
It's him.
yes, this is the John DeMartini from there. Hi, how you doing?" And I'm now, you're friendly with a guy. It doesn't matter because
Yeah.
you achieved what you do, and you just
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
chuckle.
Right. Right. Right.
So I was very inspired to see him. I'd like to try to meet up with him or something. So I send back, "Yes, it's great to see you. I haven't heard from you since 1973. I kicked you out of the car."
Right. Right. Right.
So the guy sends a message back, and I'm not allowed to say that probably on the public television or public thing, but it says, "You effing did it, man."
Wow.
So
Amazing.
I brought a tear to my eye when I got that message back.
Yeah.
The guy that did the magnetic trains went on to build magnetic trains. That's what he did. Some
Wow.
of the
Wow.
magnetic trains used in the world today, he did. And
Wow.
I went out and did what I did. But he
Wow.
was sitting in my class now, listening to the guy that he said would probably work in the cotton gin.
Right. Full circle. What a inspiration. Well, it's cool
That's
too
why
that
if you stay with something long enough, the naysayers eventually, first they ridicule you, then they violently oppose you, and then it becomes self-evident, and then they honor you. So it's
yeah.
just about you just got to stay with something long enough and build incremental momentum that's unstoppable towards something that's deeply meaningful.
Well said. Well said. Well, this has been incredible. John, I appreciate you taking the time to come on. And what is it? What is the best way for those listening to connect, follow your work, etc.?
They just simply go to my website, drdemartini.com, and there's a value determination process that people can do free. It's private. That can help them clarify what's really priority to them. Because a lot of people say, "I really want to do this and this and this," but their life doesn't demonstrate it.
Yeah.
How do you determine what your life really demonstrates it's important to you? It's an exercise on there. It takes about 30 minutes of your time. It's well worth it.
Amazing.
And there's also podcasts and there's other things on there. You could stay on that website. You're going to have to believe in some sort of reincarnation because you're not going to be able to keep up with that website. You're going to run out of time in your life. So you have to keep coming back to it. There's enough on there to keep it.
Amazing. Well, I do have one final question for you here, and it is my cliche closer. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to John DeMartini?
Well, most philosophers and thinkers have pretty well discerned that the universe doesn't have a meaning as much as we have a meaning. And each meaning is based on what we bring to the table things mean to us. Aristotle said that the golden mean was between excess and deficiency. So anytime we exaggerate or minimize anything, somewhere in the middle of that is the golden mean. And that's the truer meaning of things. And then we sometimes have our biased interpretations that make meaning out of things. And I like to think that whatever we're seeing, if we see the other side simultaneously, we get the truest meaning, the thing that's most meaningful, fulfilling to us. And we bring to the table that. Camus said that there's no meaning in the universe, but there is a meaning in people, and they can give it. And my observation is people that do find and extract meaning out of their existential world are the people that have the most fulfillment in life. So walking around without a purpose, without a meaning, without some, deeply fulfilling pursuit, I think leaves you empty. So I think there's a value in having meaning. I feel very fulfilled life, a meaningful life, getting to do what I feel is my calling, which is researching and sharing ideas and teaching and helping people, recognize their magnificence. People who
Absolutely.
compare themselves to others and don't, instead of comparing their daily actions to their own dreams.
Yeah.
But the thing that's most meaningful is the thing that's the highest value in their life that they feel called to pursue.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast and share your wisdom. This has been extraordinary. And yeah, thank all of you out there for tuning in your beautiful brainwaves and incredible hearts. Until next time, journey well.